folks, welcome to FiddleHed Fiddle Lessons. I'm going to do a lesson on the tune Rolling Waves. I'm going to add some variation to it, my own variations, and I'm just going to play the whole tune and then talk about what I added from the basic version. If you don't already know the tune, learn the basic first. I got a lesson on that, and then do this one. And a final note before I get started, these are just variations I like and that I find enjoyable, but what I really hope you get from these variation lessons is how you can play with the tunes to create your own variations and find your own voice in fiddle. So here we go, Rolling Waves. Okay, by the way, I have a D drone going. It's a way to help you play in tune, you play with the drones. I have lessons on that, a few lessons on that, and it's also just enjoyable. I just like it, and I find that all my students like it too, so we're doing it more and more. Anyway, but to teach it, I'm going to turn it off because I want you to be able to hear more clearly what I'm doing. So what I like to do in these variations is play the very basic version, assuming that you know it, or that you've played long enough that you can kind of get the difference, alright? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play the basic version of the first chord of the A, and then I'm going to play the variation. Variation. So I added two main things to this part. In the first bar, I took this and I added what I call jig swing, which is kind of making the first of every three notes, or every triplet, making the first a little longer, second a little shorter, and the third staying the same. And if you read music, that means that the first eighth note becomes a dotted eighth, the second eighth note becomes a 16th, third eighth note stays the same. So we go from to. So now I'm just going to do the jig swing on the first three notes. Back to basic. Can you hear the difference? The basic's very even and the jig swing's like da da da. Alright, I have a whole lesson on that. I've got play along track exercises for that as well as part of this Irish fiddle course module I'm making. Alright, and then in the second bar, the basic was, and I added there a mordant to the A2 or C sharp. There's that again. In very slow motion. Mordants are just two quick notes added to the beginning of a phrase. And faster it'd be. Alright, so again I'll play the whole variation very slowly. Alright, and now I'll just move on to the second chord of the A part, basic version. Variation. So in the the third bar, or the beginning of this second quarter, we had, in the basic version, we had D2, 1, 2, open, 1, open. So I added two things there. Instead of D2, 1, 2, I did a turn. In slow motion, a turn is 2. So I'm adding 4 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I went from D2, 1, 2 to, and then fast it's, and then the second half of that bar is open, 1, open. And so basically there I'm doing what's known as a cut. So I'm kind of turning this into a long note and then using first finger to cut it. But it happens so quick and it's almost atonal. So it's almost just a rhythmic flicker. Alright? You can practice in slow motion like that. Alright? We got a whole lesson on cuts and a whole lesson on the beginning, which is actually, I should have said, that's called a roll, or in classical music, a turn. And cuts, okay? Cuts are very similar to something else called grace notes. In fact, they might be really the same thing, just slightly different. I usually refer to cuts as like you have a long note that you're breaking up, so it's the same note on either side of the cut note. So like, and a grace note would be something different, where you come from a different note into that. All right. I'm just going to move on though, and the fourth bar, basic was. So on this D3, 2, 1 from the basic, I'm doing, and that's a 16th note triplet. So fast, this will sound like basic, variation. So the whole second quarter played really slowly. Variation. Alright, so I have play-along tracks for the different quarters of the variation, just like in the basic lessons there's play-along tracks for the various unique quarters. There's the same thing for the variations. So if something's not quite clear, I recommend just listening to it a whole bunch on your own and trying to play along. And with all these variations, these Irish variations that happen really fast, do your best to find a way to slow them down. And that's a lot of what this course I've made is about, is like kind of really slowing down the various things like mordents, grace notes, cuts, rolls, so you can just see how they work and eventually just work up to speed, maybe use a metronome or whatever you need. Alright, so the third quarter is the same as the first. I'll just review it. I could have done something different there, and a lot of fiddlers would. In fact, it's hard for me to do the same variation the same way every time. If you listen closely to the beginning, I'm pretty sure I didn't do it exactly as I arranged it. But that said, I try to create repetitions, even though these are variation lessons, because I don't want to like overburden you with too many ideas. I want you to take a few of the basic ideas and really learn them well. And basically, I want you to learn how to make your own variation. Okay, so the fourth quarter is it's very similar to the second quarter, and so the only thing that's different is that instead of going down to open D, and we're gonna go and D3, 2, 3. So here's the it'll help to do the basic. I should have done that first. Basic version of the fourth quarter, the A is. And then the variation is. Again, I'll do that. Alright, So take a moment, pause this video, practice each one of these things. We've covered almost all the kind of main variations, main finger ornamentation for Irish fiddling in this one little part. So really pause and practice that right now. Okay, cool. Now try to do that with this play along track. Try to follow along with the play along track. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, cool. So moving on to the B part, in my arrangement I actually didn't do anything different for the first quarter of the B part. I'll just play what I did, which is the same as the basic. So it's worth noting that maybe you don't need to add variation to something. Maybe it sounds good already, and you should really consider whether, even if you think it's a good idea to add variation, if it's helping or maybe cluttering up the tune. Very important point, and that's why I really try to emphasize going between the taking it with one little phrase, going between the basic, the variation, and looping them constantly, because that'll really help you get that variation, but also get a sense of whether it's working or not. Maybe it's just, I don't know, but it's worth trying. It's worth trying, but you know, you always want to be asking yourself, is this making the music better? Listen to what the song wants you to do, okay? So I'm going to move on to the second quarter of the B part. Basic version. Variation. Alright, so the first part of that, or the third bar of the B part, is the same as the basic. And the basic was D2, 1. So here I'm doing a roll on D2 again. And then on D1, I'm doing a cut, so cutting it with my second finger. And even more slow motion. So, I talked about jig swing at the beginning. So jig swing is taking something like and giving it a little swing. As I go into more detail in the cuts lesson I made, but a cut is actually a fast version of the jig swing. All right, a cut, and the word cut is used by Irish fiddlers. The word jig swing I don't think is, I think that's just something I invented because it seemed like a good way to describe that, sort of taking something that's a straight triplet and making it swing. Maybe there's if anybody out there reads well and knows the musicology, let me know if there's a classical term for that. I'm kind of curious. Is there a classical term for doing that? Alright, let's do the third quarter of the B part, starting with the basic. Alright, now let's do the variation. So, I only added one thing, and what I added was on this part, I added a 16th note triplet at the beginning. So here it is in slow motion. E1, 3, 1 really quickly. So now let's do this. Let's alternate between the basic version of the third quarter of the B part and the variation version, because I think it's a very good, I talked about that earlier, but it's always better to do something than to talk about it. So I'm just gonna do it maybe the whole loop, so basic and variation in a constant loop 3 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. at different speeds, and the more you do it, your fingers are just slowly getting it. They're slow. The fingers need more time than your brain to get stuff. Your brain is like, I got it, let's move on to the next thing. Next tune, next technique. But your fingers are still figuring out a lot of stuff. Alright, so anyway, that's the third quarter of the B part. Fourth quarter of the B is the same as the fourth of the A. So it's... Alright, so now I'm just going to play through the entire B part with variations very slowly. Pause and practice them if you don't feel comfortable with any certain thing. But here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's it. I hope that's fun for you. I hope that you are able to integrate a little bit of that into your playing. And if it's overwhelming, then just do one variation in a week maybe. Just master jig swing or something. You know, don't be in a hurry with the stuff. And if it's too little for you, I would say master all this stuff and immediately try adding some of your own variations. Yeah, and just use this as kind of a jumping off point. If you're, you know, maybe you're new to this, but technically it's not that hard. You know, like I hope it frees you up in your playing. Hopes it opens some doors for you to have fun and play with your music. Okay, enough said. Now, go fiddle with it.
Go to FiddleHed.com for a progressive, step-by-step course outline, color-coded tabs, play-along tracks, sheet music, and much more.
Thanks for watching the video club. Excellent.
And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks.